Let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get straight into part two. Us left off with our village team inside of the One Night Ultimate Aliens guide. We're going to continue with talking about the Psychic. So, the Psychic is a very interesting character because the way that she essentially works is that depending on what the app tells her, she's going to be able to look at either one or two cards from either an even odd player, a player higher than her, or lower than her in a number count. So basically, all that it is that I didn't even think about when it comes to the psychic is that she's essentially a far more regulated mystic wolf. Because the mystic wolf, for all cases and purposes, is able to look at any player's card. Whereas the psychic has a lot more restrictions in that regard. So I'll leave this right here just to kind of show you what all the options look like and the ways that the moderator can potentially mess with how powerful or how weak the psychic is. When it comes to the psychic and the overall look of the team, specifically how it interacts with the rest of the village team, is that you're one of the few information roles that could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, depending on the player number. So it's a little bit hard, as it is with most One Night Ultimate Alien roles, to explain because her abilities aren't the same from game to game. But let's go ahead and switch over and see what the rest of the community has to say. So right here, the One Night community says that when you claim Psychic, if you viewed a village role, you can ask that players who couldn't be viewed say what they were, for the players who could be viewed. This increases the chance that an alien claims a role that is already in play. Basically, breaking this down, let's say that as the psychic, you were looking at player 3, and you know that player 3 is the Rascal. You know that for a fact, because that's what the app told you to look at, so that's what you do know. Because any other players that are inside your game couldn't be viewed, it just makes sense to cover all of your bases. Because you have a role that you can confirm an alien won't claim, and secondly, you get people to out their roles, then pretty much, like I said, it reduces the chances of an alien picking something. But you gotta be careful with this strategy, especially if an alien tries to get a jump on the strategy first, to where they'll be like, no, I'm the psychic, I'm the one who saw this. And basically, it's just a back and forth, whose word do you believe over others, which in a lot of social deduction games, but especially here, you definitely don't want to be caught in that case of there's two people who are disputing over the same role. It's a 50-50 shot. So pretty much everyone else in the village and will kind of come to the consensus of just vote them both out just to be safe. So that's something to keep in mind both as the psychic and as an alien in general. If you view a role that affects you, since you are their neighbor, such as the mortician or diseased, you might want to act on this knowledge. If you know that you're sitting next to a mortician, it would probably be best to go ahead and out this information, especially if you have a way through what you were able to do during the night to be able to confirm and be able to look and see that the neighbor to your right is, in fact, the mortician. So you don't want to get killed in order to throw away the game for the village team. So that's just something to keep in mind. And it's especially important with the diseased, especially if you're combined in an epic battle with vampires, because with the diseased, you have two ways that things could go horribly wrong. One, either you yourself have the mark of the diseased, or two, if someone's trying to claim that you're the diseased, then people voting for you or for your mark has a way to throw away everyone else's chances of winning, especially if a lot of the village team votes for you because of your particular mark or believing that you're the disease themselves. So, one key thing about the psychic is that the psychic may not view their own card, even if they are told they have the option to. If an alien foolishly attempts this, they are outed. Because pretty much that's not the way that the psychic works at all. The psychic only works with being able to interact with everybody else inside of One Night Ultimate Alien. Only interacts with the direct numbers or certain number of cards. So That's very important to keep in mind, as it gives you a ton of options as the psychic to either come out with your information and take away the possibility of an alien trying to blend in, or trying to be able to catch an alien in a lie and be like, nope, I saw this player number, I could confirm what this person was. Things of that nature. So, there's actually something that's very different with the psychic in comparison to pretty much any of the other roles inside of One Night Ultimate Alien, specifically on the village team. Because there's actually a lot more importance when it comes to the role selection, whether the psychic is in the game or not. Because the psychic work as a village-aligned Mystic Wolf with more restrictions, as I mentioned earlier. If you want to give the Mystic Wolf a hiding place, let's say that you know that it's hard to bluff as a Mystic Wolf, then the psychic is a good bluff for the Mystic Wolf. Much in the same way as like the Master from One Night Ultimate Vampire and the Prince from One Night Ultimate bonus rolls are incredibly similar enough to where they work as bluffs. Or the Alpha Wolf and the Witch are great to work as bluffs. Things of that nature. Psychic works better than the Seer, as they usually view cards from the center. So, that's something else to keep in mind, just from a moderator's point of view, when you're deciding what roles are coming in and what aren't going into the game. What sorts of information do you want to give the village team, but also want to help out the werewolf team to where it's pretty much coming down to a battle of wits between the independent roles, the minority team of the game, and the village team. A player count of 6 or more ensures that the psychic has some agency in which card to view. You give the psychic a lot more options if you have all 10 players, because if you have even options, then of course you have even options, and if you have odd, you have odd. Whereas with 3 players, there's only so many cards that the psychic's going to be able to look at if you have her in play. With potential for a ripple that reveals a lot of information, aliens are not very suited for games where villagers can confirm each other, and viewing roles can be too strong. The psychic works better as a foil to the Mystic Wolf. So pretty much saying that if you have a lot of roles like, say, the Insomniac, of course the Psychic, occasionally the Mortician, a lot of roles that can either check each other and look at each other and be like, yep, we know that you're this because of these reasons, then it's significantly harder for ripples to do anything that can kind of flip all that information on its head. So you want to have a mixed balance when it comes to One Night Ultimate Alien between roles that give good information, but plenty of chaos to kind of mix it up and keep some of the village in the dark. So that way you have an interesting balance that's going on here. Also, just considering this, if you include too many roles whose actions vary from game to game and can shift pretty much this entire social deduction game from a bluffing game to more of a memory game. One Night Ultimate Alien roles work better when they're mixed with roles from other expansions to add a little bit of randomness to an otherwise familiar game. So yes, it is good to play with all of the characters and just play One Night Ultimate Alien, but it's also more beneficial to also have a way to where if you take out roles like the cow who do the same thing every single time, or any other roles that you know that are going to do the same thing every time, adding all the randomness is just like, okay, this happened, so this. It's a memory game. It's way less boring. Well, more boring, actually, to kind of be able to just simply guess because you memorized this happened and this happened. Whereas if the aliens are given a chance to bluff and to kind of strategize and manipulate the people around them, or manipulate the information that is true, it makes it a lot more fun in being able to tell who is a good liar, who isn't a good liar, who got good information, who's giving bad information, things of that nature. So definitely keep all of that in mind whenever you are deciding whether or not you are going to use the psychic inside of your role selection, regardless of if you're doing just One Night Ultimate Alien, if you're doing epic battles with any other minority teams, or if you're using any of the bonus roles as well. Overall, what do I think of the psychic? I think that the psychic, depending on the answers that she gets from the app, can be quite powerful, because when it comes to the village team, there's not that very many information roles. Depending on if the leader is on your team or not, and if he saw Zerb and Groob, that's going to really depend on how much information that the village team has. when it comes to the psychic, she's got decent information that she can go off of. The Oracle can get information, but it's not always a guarantee in every game. When we get to this last character inside of the village team, he is going to be incredibly crucial and is kind of the anchor of information for the village team. The same thing can also be said about the cow, because the cow doesn't get a whole lot of very confirmed information. It's a lot of vibes and focusing on certain areas. So when it comes to bluffing as the psychic, it's really going to depend on what the app says, and making sure that whatever you say or whatever the aliens are going to say doesn't contradict to what it is that the app told the psychic, the real psychic, to do. So that's honestly what it comes to that for the information side. For game impact, it's kind of the same way. As we mentioned with the role selection, there's a couple of variables that have to be taken into account as a moderator if you're trying to mix in the psychic with any other roles from any of the other games. So as far as game impact goes, it's okay. So yeah, this is honestly my true score for the psychic, how she compares. The Rascal is the next village team that we have for members of One Night Ultimate Alien that we're going to talk about. And the Rascal has a combination of different abilities depending on what it is that he is asked to do inside of the One Night Ultimate app. He'll have the ability to take a certain number of cards from certain players and swap them with other people. So sometimes, depending on what he does, he might act more like a troublemaker or a robber, or he might act like a drunk, for example. And that's just a few of the capabilities that the Rascal has. So pretty much the app will always tell him if he has to do that with cards, or if he has the option to do it. The key thing with One Night Ultimate anything is that whenever the wording says may, you don't have to do it. You could try to convince people that you did something, maybe to try to catch whoever the minority team is in a lie, and say, no, I actually didn't do that. Or you can always do that thing with your powers. So that's something that's important to keep in mind with the Rascal. So yeah, the Rascal serves the function pretty much as a chaos role amongst the village team, with just a lot more variability from game to game. But here are a couple of more strategies and role selection points when it comes to messing with the Rascal. So pretty much when it comes to the Rascal, there isn't much to really think about. The Rascal pretty much just follows the general strategy of whatever role it copied. And when it comes to knowing what role it is exactly that you copied, that just comes with experience. Like, if One Night Ultimate Alien is your first game, which I wouldn't recommend, you won't recognize it. But if you've been playing One Night Ultimate Werewolf, then you went to Daybreak, then you did Vampires, then you did Alien, then you can kind of get an idea and a grasp of what it is exactly that you were able to do with those specific characters. And were able to know, okay, I did this thing, which is a lot like this character. That just comes with experience and practice. Players who didn't perform the Rascal action themselves often forget exactly what the Rascal was asked to do. That happens sometimes. Sometimes it's a beginner mistake, or sometimes it's a bluff for the aliens to be like, I'm the Rascal, but rookie mistake. I forgot what it was that I was supposed to do. Make sure to keep an eye out for aliens who are trying to sow that confusion, which is like I said, sometimes an alien will be like, oops, rookie mistake. I totally forgot to do my action as the Rascal. Which may be a lie, which may be true. You never know. Sometimes playing dumb works. So that's just really the main thing to watch out for. So when it comes to the moderators, just for all the moderators out there who are setting up games, introducing people to One Night Ultimate Alien, and the One Night Ultimate series in general, Rascal can cause a lot of confusion when combined with many roles from One Night Ultimate Alien. And this should be avoided for newer players, especially in larger groups. I mean, it makes sense. One Night Ultimate Alien is thematically more unpredictable than any of the other games in the series. So, pretty much the Rascal works best as a dash of variety in a game featuring roles from other expansions. So if you've got roles like the Seer or the Revealer or the Troublemaker, the Robber, or the Village Idiot, and things like that, as long as you get that good variety of characters who get good information, like I said, as a moderator for the village team, you want to get a good balance of power for the village team, so that way they could all be doing something and can be very powerful and useful. But you also want to mix in a good number of roles that give good information, that also cause enough chaos that can try to help the village team try to figure out, okay, this information we do have, this is all the chaos that happened. This is how we can string the pieces together, and this is who the people are and why. Whereas the aliens or whoever else is the minority team can be like, okay, all this chaos happened, let's spin our own narratives inside the chaos of what did happen and try to throw village team off course. Or for the neutral team to also take advantage and to kind of decide, are they spinning the narrative to support the aliens and win alongside them or whoever the minority team is? Or are they going to help out the village team? Either one's a viable option. It's just something that you got to keep in mind. Also, combining the Rascal and the Doppelganger in a 3 to 4 player game can add a lot of variety and the right amount of confusion needed for the villain roles to thrive in a small game. I mean, it makes sense. If the Doppelganger ends up copying the Rascal, then the Rascal might be asked to do either the exact same action, or the app will switch it up and have the Doppelganger do something totally different, which would either contradict what the Rascal was doing or what have you. Make sure you're not using the Rascal as a substitute for any of the roles it can copy. If your setup depends on players being able to claim robber, they can't convincingly lie about it if the Rascal was asked to do the troublemaker action. So you can't be like, I was the robber, I stole this one card, I know what this card is. When everybody, even though they don't know who the Rascal is specifically, they're going to hear the app say, swap 2 cards from any other players. Any experienced player will be able to know, hold on, that's a troublemaker play, that is not a robber play. So there's going to be some suspicion there. But overall, when it comes to the Rascal, these are kind of the gradings that I get for him. I think he's a kind of in the middle of the pack when it comes to bluffing. Depending on what the app says, you can make it work. Other times, it's not going to work very great. So it's going to really depend on the way that you're able to think on your toes and how the aliens are going to try to think on their toes. When it comes to information, your goal is to cause chaos. So you're really not going to get the best of information. And as far as impact goes, the Rascal's on the same plane as the Pickpocket from Vampire and the Troublemaker. They cause chaos. So whatever that would be for a lot of the other information roles inside of One Night Ultimate Alien. So yeah, that's my final score for the Rascal. Now, on to perhaps the most powerful information role, regardless of the variety of things that can happen inside of One Night Ultimate Alien. We have the Exposer. And the Exposer, depending on what the app says, is going to wake up at night. And what he is going to do is that with the center cards, depending on what the app says, he's going to be able to turn over 1, 2, or 3 of those center cards. This is absolutely huge. Whereas with the Seer, you could look at it, and there's way less credibility of whether or not the Seer actually saw what she claims she saw, and that it's just not another bluff that any of the minority teams would have. The Exposer is confirmed hard proof as far as the information that is being told. It is undisputable regardless of how many cards have been shown. The other important thing about it is that all of those cards that are flipped over by the Exposer is all public information. The last thing that you want to do for the minority team, especially, is to try to claim a role when you wake up and you see the role that you're trying to claim face up in the middle, to where everybody knows that that role is not in play. Pretty much, as the role title suggests, exposing whatever lies could ever be told. Especially inside of a combination with the Revealer, if you manage to use him inside of epic battles, just as a thought. You would have the Exposer controlling the public information that exists in the middle, and the Revealer would be able to control the information that exists amongst the players. So they're a very powerful information tag team duo. And like I said, inside of the confines of just One Night Ultimate Alien alone, regardless of what answer you get, of whether it's one card, two card, or all three cards from the center on a rare chance, you still have the strongest information. The only, I guess, hole inside of the exposer is being able to claim that you were the one who did it. Because that's the, I guess, one area that can sometimes not be verified. So the aliens at that point will just go for the angle of that they're the ones that expose the card and not the person who's claiming to be the exposer. So that's the kind of hole that there is, but as far as trying to claim a role, the exposer can put a stop to all of that. He's honestly incredibly good regardless of how many cards he's able to turn over. So let's go a little bit deeper past the information that he gives the village team into the kind of strategies that the One Night Ultimate community says should be best as playing as the exposer. As a general rule, like I said with the exposer, with just how powerful his ability are, unless there's a chance that inside of an epic battle scenario where you could be like turned into a vampire or something, you want to turn over cards. Like I said, you literally have the strongest bit of information confirmed to everybody in comparison to anybody else on the village team. Leader could be good because the leader knows who all the aliens are, but you have the risk as a person on the village team of being like, okay, you might be able to find out who the leader is before the aliens do, but do you trust that the leader not only saw the aliens, but do you also believe the fact that the alien didn't see, that the leader, didn't see his urban group? Because if he did, then that puts the leader against the village team. So that's something that you've got to think of. So the leader can be great information, but he has so much things he has to hide, whether he's actually on your team or not, that he's not a super credible source for the village team to be helpful. The cow can be great, depending on if it gets tipped, but it's such a vague detection system that it's not super easy to work around. The Oracle is absolutely the most unreliable character for the village team from an information standpoint, because she might not even get any information at all in the game that you play. The Rascal is going to be causing chaos depending on certain players and things of that nature. So at that point, you might not be able to do anything with anybody else who currently has cards, which the psychic will already be doing, assuming that you can even trust the psychic with looking at other people's cards. So while the psychic is going to be taking care of cards that are around everybody and looking at them and getting information, you have the strongest information that can't be disputed. Because basically what it is that if you have a card face up and you get any other rolls in other games that are able to switch out cards in the center, that card is staying face up. So if you turn over certain cards and then you know that they got swapped, well, then you already know what that person got turned into. Everybody does. So they're going to be able to be like, okay, we could confirm a vote going this way because whoever the witch was just turned that publicly revealed alien into this person over here. So pretty much you play very similarly to a villager, as in you don't really want anybody to know who you are. But everybody knows the exposer's in play whenever cards in the center are face up at all, regardless of how many there are. You just know that he's in. And you basically, like I said, you have the most power of taking away bluffs for whoever the minority team is, whether it be aliens, vampires, or werewolves. During a time loop, if some center cards are still face down, you should definitely try to turn those cards face up, even if it means turning other cards back face down. It is useful for Team Village in exposing the villains. Pretty much, let's say you get told that like the first time you reveal one card, but then a loop happens and you get told you get to reveal 3 cards. Well, everybody during the first look before the pretty much before the loop occurs, is going to be able to see that first card that came up. And if they even if they didn't, you'll be able to see if that card came up. And then you'll be able to turn that one face down, and if you get to told two more, you've essentially were able to look at all 3 cards in the middle in one turn. Like I said, it's even better if you were able to look at more cards the first time before the time loop, because then you just reveal the last card, and now all the bluffs are out on the table. Everybody can start coming out with information, and there's nothing that the aliens can do to defend themselves. However, one thing to remember inside of the confines of epic battles is that revealing the center werewolf card is incredibly risky, as you could reveal that the alpha wolf turned you into a werewolf. Which is true. It's true. If you expose, because inside of the One Night Ultimate series, even if your role got swapped at some point or anything like that, or turned into something else during the night phase, you still do the actions of the original role that you had. So if you were the exposer, you go for the center werewolf card, you flip it over thinking that you're still the exposer, and you see the exposer in the middle, that's a problem, because now you know that you're a werewolf. And if you ever try to claim that you're an exposer later, that's a problem. And like I said, the exposer is the center version of the revealer, because the revealer does it with other people around the table, whereas the exposer focuses on the cards in the center. When it comes to selection, the exposer makes it very hard for the villains, especially in incredibly small groups. In small groups, you should either not use the exposer or use the randomization tab on the Kickstarter version of the app to adjust down the number of cards revealed. Or basically, in the modern version, reduce the chances of the exposer doing all 3 cards, or 2 cards. You might just be able to limit him to just doing 1 card instead from the center, which is enough information for small groups to where they have something to go off of, but it's not too much to where the villains don't even stand a chance. The witch gains a lot of info about their target when the exposer is in play, and revealing an exposer in the center can cause a lot of suspicion. Like I said, in that earlier example, if you are the exposer, you turn over the center werewolf card from the alpha wolf, and you see the exposer, well then clearly something doesn't add up on how an exposer could flip over cards when the exposer is now in the middle. So ultimately, when it comes to the exposer, the way that the exposer impacts the rest of the One Night Ultimate Village team inside of Alien or Epic Battles in general, he probably has the best, second best, confirmed information aside from the leader. I genuinely believe that. When it comes to a bluff, as if the aliens are going to try to bluff as him, you could make an angle. You could do that, depending on how you can manipulate others. And as far as game impact goes, because the information that the exposer gets, regardless of how limited or how high the information that he gets, it is incredibly powerful. It's probably the second most different compared to any of the roles inside of the last guide where I talked about the influence more so focusing on the voting. The exposer has the most influence on the information that the village team has on the table. So, yeah, he is incredibly dangerous, incredibly good. So, yeah, that's genuinely what I think. If you stuck all the way through both part 1 and 2 of the One Night Ultimate Alien guides, specifically covering all of the village team, I thank you. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.